This video is about Brexit, jumping on the bandwagon of current affairs, a real hot topic. But not just about Brexit, not really about Brexit, if truth be told, but how Brexit was used to manipulate progressives against the first chance of progress the UK had seen in a generation. But first I need to do some housekeeping, I think they call it, and I'll try to be quick. I jumped into making this channel at the deep end. I knew a minimal amount about how to actually make videos, let alone all the surrounding SEO, collaboration, promotion, things that you need to be good at if one is to succeed on this platform. So I've been learning as I go. I'm not usually the kind to wing it, so it has been scary, and that means that every ounce of support that I have had has really spurred me on. Now that I am a bit more comfy with some of the stuff that goes into actually making the videos, I'd like to branch out, do more collabs, upskill, offer more exclusive Patreon content, sign up below. Now at the moment I'm getting out one pretty long video every 3 weeks or so, but due to personal commitments, mental and physical health and pain stuff, I'm kind of running at full capacity. So I've decided to do what most other video essayists do and do one video every 4 weeks. This will probably have an effect on the ever-present, all-seeing analytics arrows, so I will need your support through this change. My current channel goal is to reach the YouTube monetization threshold by August this year, and to do so I need quite a few watch hours. So it's going to be a challenge, particularly with this schedule change. So if you would like to help out, then please do all the YouTube things, the liking, the subbing, the sharing and the commenting. Thank you so much. Now let's get my Brexit video done. That worked, that definitely worked. That was smooth as fuck. I am a Brit in the EU, and I'm tired. I wasn't really politically engaged before 2016, I must admit, but the political education I've had since has been something of an intense course. In case you somehow missed it, in 2016, while the United States was doing this, Britain was doing this, and I was moving back to the EU to finally make the most of my rights as an EU citizen. If you'd like information on the EU, Brexit, why any of it, there's literally hundreds of videos and articles out there explaining that. But suffice to say, anti-EU sentiment has been a thing in the UK since the EU has been a thing, and this was compounded by decades worth of political and media shenanigans. So anyway, I decided to get political with a capital P and tuned into Parliament TV on the daily and became
an anti-Brexit activist.
Of course, the first thing this involved was joining Twitter, and I followed the most Remainiest people I could find. People like Femi and James O'Brien, and other arch-Remainers, to whom I tweeted my good faith takes about citizens' rights and how Brexit was impacting my life. My tweets were well received and even read out on live broadcasts. It seemed like a pretty massive movement, and a positive one too. In among all the talk of trying to mitigate the harm of Brexit, there was also motions towards trying to understand why people voted that way in the first place. At least for a bit. Some people were saying we should have another vote, but most people I think understood that just a repeat referendum wouldn't be of much use without further specificities. And in order to gain further specificities, the UK needed to enter negotiations with the EU, which required the triggering of Article 50, which the UK Parliament did in March 2017. As I gathered from my new pro-EU chums, The triggering of the article was a really big deal. It was the starting gun in the sprint towards hard Brexit. 'Twas the oiling of a slippery slope towards no deal. It was the starting of an unstoppable stopwatch. Despite it being known at the time that it could later be revoked and it also being extended a bunch. Didn't consider having to wait to swallow down the dry pretzel before speaking again. As well as being this unstoppable force, the triggering of the article was also proof Jeremy Corbyn was a
Secret Brexiter.
despite, of course, many of the most Remainist of MPs also supporting the vote to trigger Article 50. Then, suddenly, in the political manoeuvre of the century, Theresa the Wheatfield botherer May pulled a surprise election on us to bolster her majority so that she might pass whatever agreement she brought back from the EU. At that time, Labour under Jeremy Corbyn stood on a platform of negotiating a soft Brexit, one which would have meant almost no negative impact to people's lives, while Theresa May was chatting all about how no deal might be okay actually. Labour's almost success at that GE, and I do mean almost, Labour only had to win just over 2,000 votes in key seats in order to have been the party to form government. Their almost success came as a surprise to most people, but to me it was an inspiration. Despite the loss, the Tories were weakened, and I gained hope that millions of people were willing to vote for a brighter future presented by a self-declared socialist. Surely, I thought, the momentum gained by this will continue. With enough focused support on Labour and against Theresa May, we may have hope of mitigating this yet. But while I watched Labour oppose May's proposals and offer their own, which would have secured my rights, something else was happening. I was being told that the thing that I was watching happening was not happening by the very people I joined Twitter to follow. And they were becoming increasingly hostile against me for supporting the only alternative to the Conservative Party. The public figures and influential accounts who had previously been liking and retweeting my tweets, using my Brit in the EU status to prove their points, started quote tweeting me, blocking me, and insulting me. During the period between 2017 and 2019, especially once Theresa May had her agreement from the EU, a general election might have happened at any moment, so it was really important to keep the pro-Labour message alive every single day. My mentions started filling up with abuse. I was called naive, brainwashed, an ideologue,
A secret Brexiter.
just for supporting the only people who could and were trying to protect my way of life. As Theresa May had no majority in Parliament, her withdrawal agreement was voted down. This could have been good news. Time to change the agreement to one which was more sensible, which ignored Theresa May's silly red lines and didn't harm millions of people. Speaking of red lines, I remember the EU having a few red lines of their own. I was promised that the EU would never agree a deal which would harm citizens' rights, that Theresa May was screwed, that she'd never get an agreement out of the EU. But anyway, mitigating the agreement on offer was not the message coming from Remain activists. Now, apparently, was the time for a people's vote. All attention was on Jeremy Corbyn to back a people's vote. Another general election was impossible, they said. A waste of time trying to get one, they said. Trying to get the Tories to agree to a people's vote, though, that apparently that's a winning way to spend your time. And anyway, I had questions. Corbyn did end up doing what they and the majority of Labour members wanted, and tried to get a second confirmatory referendum in Parliament like a few times, but it was never clear to me what would go on the ballot in this people's vote. These calls started coming in after Parliament had just, and I mean earlier that evening, just voted down the withdrawal agreement for good reasons. It was bad. It was much better than the one that Johnson ended up getting, but millions of people's ways of lives were at risk from Theresa May's deal, and I was happy it was voted down. I asked everyone I could on Remain Twitter what they wanted on the ballot of this referendum, what they had to have now, because the thing was, the opinion polls for Leave or Remain were never really clear. Remain did have a slight lead through 2017 to 19, but just like they did leading up to the Brexit referendum. And when you took into account the wouldn't votes and the don't knows, I wouldn't have bet money on Remain winning, put it that way. And so my opinion was, if there was to be another vote, then the deal on the ballot needed to be sensible. And this was when I was told in no uncertain terms that the EU would never renegotiate with Corbyn, and besides, there is no such thing as a sensible Brexit. I was being accused of ideological purity by people who were calling the thing they voted for in 2017 as bad as any other kind of Brexit, and to even suggest supporting it to be a betrayal of the Remain cause. And anyway, they said, a single markety, customs union-y Brexit wasn't really Brexit. The Brexiteers would never accept it, so there's no point, they said. Except millions of Leavers did accept it in 2017, and when Nigel Farage was chatting all about being like Norway. To me, there was a massive contradiction at the heart of the message from the People's Vote campaign. On the one hand, any attempt by Corbyn to talk to May to try and mitigate the possible harm, this was seen as him trying to help her deliver Brexit.
You're a con man, Jeremy. You support the Tory Brexit, which will devastate the economy, and intend to help them deliver it. Vote Corbyn, get Tory. #Tory Labour Pact.
But implied within the People's Vote message was either voting for Theresa May's deal to pass through Parliament, or running the massive risk of putting no deal on the ballot. Something which Caroline Lucas of the Green Party even suggested. I was astounded at how strong the assumption was that Remain would just win this time. And the thing was, the main Remainer activists weren't exactly trying to change minds about Brexit. That Femi's project, Our Future, Our Vote, they were explicit on their original website about how what they are aiming to do is convince Corbyn to back a People's Vote. Not to convince people to vote Remain this time, not to convince people who voted Leave that maybe a People's Vote would be a good idea. Literally just to force Corbyn to adopt a policy of a People's Vote. Something which Jeremy Corbyn unilaterally was unable to do. He supported amendments for it in Parliament, but the Labour leader does not get to decide policy for the Labour Party. That's not, nor has it ever been, how the Labour Party works. And that seemed to be the gist of all the Remain campaigns at the time, solely focused on Labour, absolutely in no way trying to reach out to people who voted Leave. I said before that the majority of Labour members wanted another vote, but that's members. Paid up, card-carrying members like I was. Labour voters, on the other hand, were an entirely different story. The majority of the seats Labour held had voted Leave, and minds weren't changing. If anything, people just wanted government to get on and do the thing they said they would do. For the entirety of 2019, members of the Liberal Democrats, the Green Party, Plaid Cymru, and the the TIG cooks for change, the Tiggers, the cooks for change, Independent Tinges for Change. They all told us that Corbyn was the problem.
No one has done more damage to the Remain cause than Jeremy Corbyn, not even Farage, Johnson or Gove.
The one thing preventing us from having another vote, which was the thing that would fix this entire Brexit mess, and this was because he was a
Secret Brexiter.
He was being duplicitous, obfuscating, dithering and delaying. When what I was seeing was him whipping and voting for amendments for this people's vote, none of which passed, because there wasn't the numbers in Parliament for a people's vote. All the time, Labour officials were in meetings with the trade unions trying to convince them to agree with Labour adopting this people's vote policy in the next manifesto. Trade unions who represented a load of people who voted Leave in the Brexit referendum. They needed convincing to give their name to this people's vote policy, and that took time. And instead of helping, the anti-Brexit campaign was running around all over the place, calling the Labour leader untrustworthy. It soon became clear that the only thing that would appease this section of British politics was if Jeremy Corbyn stopped being the Labour leader. It wasn't enough that he became more Remainy or spoke stronger for a people's vote. He had to go. All the while, there was no time for a leadership election and nobody stepping up to take his place. None of this was about stopping Brexit or even mitigating it. I was told directly by members of the Liberal Democrat Party that not only would the Lib Dems never support Jeremy Corbyn into power, but they also wouldn't if his successor was from the left of the party. The terms were clear. Labour, the Democratic Socialist Party, would need to stop being that again. And all while this is going on, the Tories were in the middle of a leadership crisis. Failure to pass her a withdrawal agreement meant that Theresa May was facing pressure from all sides, culminating in her officially resigning in July of 2019, giving way to one freshly appointed Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson. And it didn't take long for Alexander de Pfeffel to start agitating for another general election. After a stream of resignations from within the party, including from his brother, Baron Joseph Edmund Johnson of Marylebone. Such men of the people, aren't they? Anyway, all that meant that Johnson was even weaker than May was, and so he was going to do everything he could to secure another election. That thing we were all told was impossible. In September 2019, the Lib Dems pivoted to revoke Article 50. No chit-chat, no drama, just cancel it, done. Then in October, as Boris Johnson was ramping up the pressure on Corbyn to grant him a general election, so too were the Liberal Democrats, Green Party and Plaid Cymru, who had now dubbed themselves the Remain Alliance. Also the SNP, who just knew they'd win a load of seats. All focus was on Corbyn to do the thing that he'd been vilified for trying to do earlier that year. The Remain Alliance unanimously declared that a vote for Labour was a vote for Brexit.
Taken together with the fact that Corbyn has always wanted to be out of the EU and not declared whether he would back Remain as McDonnell has, it seems clear that a vote for Labour is a vote for Brexit.
A vote for Labour is a vote for #Brexit. Vote #Lib Dems if you want to #Stop Brexit and keep Britain a country. The #Lib... The Lib Dem surge is the only hope for Western liberal #democracy as we know it. And this #hypocrite has proven once more. Never trust a Lexiter. Never give up.
A vote for Labour is a vote for Brexit and will tear the country apart.
By this point, I was far from alone in my suspicions. The Lib Dems and Green Party's comment sections began filling up with really angry and confused supporters and members of their party who couldn't believe that the thing that they had been on marches to try to achieve, the thing that they had been fighting for years, was now being labelled not Remainy enough, vote for Brexit actually. Then came the Tactical Voting Brigade. So at the start of the 2019 general election campaign, up popped a load of websites saying that they would tell you who to vote for in order to secure a Tory loss. The main one I saw being pushed was being run by Best for Britain, a pro-EU campaigning group partly founded by Gina I cared more about Corbyn than Brexit Miller. And their tool was being pushed hard. However, within hours of its launch, reports started coming in of some fairly sus advice. Essentially, it was telling people to vote for the Liberal Democrats in Labour Tory marginals, seats which the Liberal Democrats had never won and had absolutely no chance of winning. After a lot of pushback, it changed its modelling and advice, but damage had been done. You see, this election was in December, which is unusual, and so people had been advised to register for postal votes, and many had already cast theirs. At the same time, I was being told how important it is that we get as many true Remainer MPs as possible into the House of Commons.
Are you a Remainer who intends to vote strategically? We need more Remain MPs in the House of Commons. Consider voting for #Unite to Remain or #Remain Alliance candidates. Only vote for Labour candidates who have, or will by request, pledge themselves to remain.
Which meant not voting for Labour even if they could win your seat if that particular MP was a bit Brexity. Ideological purity though. And that Remain Alliance pact thing, right, they were standing down in seats for each other. This pact didn't include Labour, and of course this was yet more proof that Drum Robbery Crobbins was a
Secret Brexiter.
All the while, the Liberal Democrats were stating clearly that they would never ever support Jeremy Corbyn into government. And besides, those Lib Dems, they were in it to win it. For some reason, Jo Squirrelbane Swinson thought she could get away with going around saying she could be the actual Prime Minister, while polling at 11% and running on a platform which was essentially a big f*** you to half the electorate. Oh, and skills wallets. Running on a campaign which was fueled exclusively by extremely misplaced #GirlBoss energy, the Liberal Democrats were spamming households across the country with bar charts that PragerU would reject as silly. The point being, shenanigans abounded. Tomfoolery ran amok. Hardly any of the actions by Team Remain did anything at all except for harm Labour's chances. And while the Remain vote was being purposefully split, Ode Nige Farage of the Brexit Party was standing down in over 300 seats so that Boris Johnson could run unopposed on a Get Brexit Done platform. The whole time, Labour's transformative policies were sidelined in what became known as the Brexit election, the results of which were
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
hello darkness, my old friend. So now I'm here with my temporary leave to remain, disenfranchised, with a folder of documents marked proof of me, full of my movements within the EU, in case I need to prove myself or my relationship with my partner when the time comes that I'll inevitably have to ditch my UK citizenship. Looking in from the outside as the worst Tory government ever tears apart my home. And as the policies which would have transformed the lives of my loved ones are confined to history by a new Labour leader who too seems to love punching left. I'd best get learning German. Look, I know a lot of my leftist viewers would think that Britain EU tears is lib shit. I get it. Much as one can be against the actions of the US state, but still feel as if certain aspects of its constitution are worth standing for, that's kind of how I feel about the EU. The perforation of national borders, for example, is just going to be a necessary thing in our climate-doomed future. But this video isn't about the EU or the implications of Brexit. It's about the Lib Dems. Sorry, it's about the duplicity of centrists. While I was always somewhat left-leaning, it was always in a kind of liberal, not really thinking things through kind of way. The thing that leaned me left was the financial crisis and particularly the response to it. But the thing that booted me all the way in was the response to Corbyn. Under him, Labour weren't offering radical leftist policies. I mean, geez, some of the policies are even being discussed by the political right at the minute. He was offering a social democratic manifesto, which would have been seen as bog standard in many of our neighbouring EU countries, but it would have been transformative for the UK. His foreign policy alone would have been a pretty decent step away from the status quo. They would have done an audit on the impact of British colonialism internationally. They would have allowed the Chagos Islanders to return home. They would have halted arms sales to Saudi Arabia and Israel. They would have immediately recognised the state of Palestine. And they would have placed peace, diplomacy and anti-imperialism at the very heart of UK foreign policy. And that's just to name a few things. Go and check out their manifesto in the link below. A government for the many, not the few. One which actually cared about not letting its citizens die unnecessarily. One which wanted to promote peace and justice. One which wanted Britain to recognise its place in the world and its history, and one which would have made it so much harder for corruption and theft of public resources. I thought all that was stuff that Libs were supposed to like myself, but I guess that was just me. If you're not from the UK, you might not get how concerted the efforts against Labour circa 2016 through to 2020 actually were. It was from all directions. It was constant. Every single day, the main character of all the news was Jumble Rob Crobbins and what's he up to now? Not stopping Brexit, being a Czech spy, spreading Russian propaganda for saying that the Tories will probably use Brexit to further privatise the NHS, being an existential threat to British Jews, being a terrorist sympathiser, inviting North Korea to nuke the UK, nationalising sausages? Nationalising sausages. That was the thing. All of this you might expect from the political right. After all, your political enemies will attack you no matter what, won't they? If mitigating the harm of Brexit or even stopping Brexit was the actual point of the behaviours of the loudest Remain and People's Vote campaigners, then nothing they did made sense at all. Making this huge, constant drama about the twice elected leader of the opposition's personality while he's offering your dream policies on a platter, make that make sense. Whereas, if the point was to ensure that the left would not keep control of the Labour Party and would be kept as far away from political power as possible for as long as possible, well, then things start to add up. I don't think I'll ever forgive those who used Brexit, who used Remain, who used people like me as a stick with which to beat the left. And I'm sure I'm not alone. Maybe one day we'll be thankful because you may have radicalised a generation.